love flowers and the beauties of nature so much. Let me read the program, and we'll go as follows. I will be honored to read the obituary. We'll then have a piano solo, "Oh My Father" by Stacy Crow, and a tribute by daughter Mary Marks, and a musical selection of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "I Often Go Walking," "My Heavenly Father Loves Me," "I Wonder When He Comes Again." They will be accompanied by Carolyn Clark, a daughter-in-law. We'll have a speaker, Darwin Knudsen, a brother, and a vocal solo by Janet Golightly. "A Mother's Eye Reflects the Light of Heaven," accompanied by Carolyn Clark. Then I will give the closing remarks. We'll go to that point. Mary Virginia Knudsen Clark, age 85, passed away April 11, 1997, at her daughter's home in Price, Utah. Born September the 3rd, 1911, in Salt Lake City, Utah, the daughter of Joseph, Rudolph, and Nellie Holmes Callie Knudsen. She married Alan Benjamin Clark on July the 3rd, 1935, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Their marriage was later solemnized in the Salt Lake Temple. Alan preceded her in death in 1966. It was a long time to remain a widow, wasn't it? Retired educator from the Granite School District, she was very dedicated and a loving teacher, very active in the LDS Church and her community. Her foremost interest was her family. Enjoyed reading, piano, out of doors, and life itself. She lived life to its fullest and a lady to the end. Survived by her 4 sons and 1 daughter. Alan B., wife Debbie, Gary R. and wife Sharon, Thomas B. and wife Carolyn, David K. and wife Denise, all of Salt Lake City, and Mary C., husband Brian Marks. 28 grandchildren, 18 great-grandchildren, 2 brothers, Rudolph and Darwin Knudsen, preceded in death by 1 sister, Helen Graham, and 1 brother, Harvey Knudsen. We will go forward with the program. Stacy, if you'll come.
butchered myself, but I take it as a blessing and a privilege to do this. Most of my remarks are taken from a life story that my mother wrote herself. She kind of tucked it away and didn't flaunt it to anybody, but we found it and would like to share it with some of the things from it. She was born September 3rd, 1911 in Salt Lake City, and they moved to her grandpa's Callie's home, which was on 20th East and 36 South. And never did we ever pass it that Mother didn't make a comment of that was her grandpa. Callie's home. She states, my grandfather owned property in each direction from his house, acres on every side. I don't know how many, but there are a good many houses on that property that he owned now. There was a large deep hollow on the south where he raised lots of fruit, peaches, pears, plums, apples, raspberries, and dewberries. This beautiful place was a child's paradise. In my child's eye, I can see it and the wonderment I felt when I looked around me, the birds, wildflowers, and the orchard bearing fruit. And Mother was a great lover of nature, as you'll see on through here. They then moved to Cottonwood, which is the old Knudsen corner on the big Cottonwood Creek, and that's where the flour mill was built. And the flour mill was built by her great-grandfather. Much of their food was raised on the 4 acres around it, and there were multiple uses of made from those 4 acres. She says, I can see the tall cottonwoods and poplars to the south and west of the house. The duck pond was between 4 large poplars that formed a square about 15 feet apart, and the ground sloped to the center and had a foot of more water. And it was fun to see the ducks dipping their bills into the water and falling out of the pond. A large cherry tree stood in the middle of the orchard with crab apples and other apples around it. And she talks about how her favorite job was to feed some magpies that her father kept in a pen in the orchard. So I had occasion to visit the orchard every morning. We fed them raw hamburger, and it tasted so good to me that the birds didn't get much. However, she said my mother was aware of this, and she'd stand at the back door and say, now I'm watching you, don't eat that meat. But I'd walk slowly, and when I got to the pens, I would stoop down and eat some and give a little to the birds. My body must have craved that raw meat because that's the only thing I can ever remember being so willful and defiant about. And it would happen every day. I don't recall how long we had the birds, but it's certainly indented in my mind. An exciting time for her was to go and pick wildflowers for her grandpa's house on the reservoir. Here the buttercups grew straight and tall out of the west sand, with lady slippers and Indian paintbrush scattered around them, and the little star flowers dotted everywhere. We'd find the dogtooth violets among the oaks nestled close to the Oregon grape up in the grove. Everything was so fresh and damp. This was the choicest places in the valley at that time. She goes on to say how she loved the Oregon grape and the pussy willow and the smell of the skunkberry brush. You can see she really got into nature. I will always remember the walks we took, for they stand out vividly in my mind. My mother, Aunt Pearl, or Aunt Dean, would always take us. She always had a special place for her Aunt Dean and Aunt Pearl. I was so happy when I was in their presence, I can almost feel the joy I felt when we went on these walks. The sun was trying to burst through the clouds, and everything was so sparkly and fresh. These walks and the things expressed by those who took me created in me a great and enduring love of nature. And that lasted throughout her total life. When she was about 4 years old, Aunt Pearl bought her a blue plaid dress, and one day she came up to take her to the camp and show her off. My mother got me ready, fixed my hair, and dressed me up real pretty. I remember that was a real special day for me because I loved to go up to her camp, young as I was. Although Aunt Pearl was always very busy, she loved to do things for others to make their life happier. She was a very happy person herself. She took lots of pictures of us and took us many places. Her folks didn't have a lot of money, and I think her Aunt Pearl did splurge a little bit on her and kind of spoiled her a little bit, but she probably deserved it where she was one of the first grandchildren. When I was 6, I started Oakwood School, but I hated the walk because I was scared of Washy Shelkin and the Cunnington boy. I made every excuse so I wouldn't have to go, but when they didn't work, my mother would walk with me, or else threaten me, and then I would go so far and come back home. Finally, I got the mumps, and that did it. I was so glad, and then I got the whooping cough and didn't have to go back that year. In March of 1918, that's when they moved to Rigby, Idaho, for her father to help run the 80-acre farm of her Aunt Tora, which was a sister to her grandfather, Knudsen, because her boys had been called into the war. Her dad ran the farm, and then they halved the profit. That farm was a wonderful place to live as a child. There were so many enchanting places and things to do. To the south, there was a large orchard with all kinds of apples, plum trees, and pear trees. This place unfolded so many mysteries of nature to us. We soon learned the bird's secret and knew how many, what color and size of eggs in each nest in the orchard. The mother birds would hover around and try to scare us, but we weren't scared, and we never touched the eggs or destroyed the nest, so no harm was done. South of the orchard, there was a broad irrigation ditch where we used to swim. The poplar trees grew in the front. She said, my father topped these trees, and that was another exciting project. When all the trees were laying on the ground, it was a small jungle to us children. How simple life was, and the entertainment that they could use to entertain themselves. I thought Idaho was a great place to live at that time. I loved school. Going to and coming home the whole day was fun. In first grade, I learned the sounds on the chart so fast, and soon we were in books, and then I was really set. In second grade, I read everything I could get my hands on. We had no library. I knew of no library in Rigby. By the middle of second grade, Mrs. Brossard came to me one noon and asked if I'd like to go into the third grade. And she said yes, and that very afternoon, they took her into the third grade. She says, Miss Scholes, I loved her at first sight. We got along fine. She used to write to me in the summer. The first letter I got, I was thrilled to pieces and thought that she was the most wonderful person. Mother loved school. She was always eager to learn. Her entire life, if she could find a better way to do something, or there was another way, she wanted to know. She was teachable. She was humble. She was always wanting to better herself. After living the 4 years in Idaho, Aunt Tora had decided that she would sell the farm, mainly because farming was no longer profitable. A 100-pound sack of spuds was selling for 25 cents, and that was only if you could find a buyer. Money was very tight and scarce, and Aunt Tora had found a buyer for the farm, so we were all prepared to leave, and they left on the 16th of December, 1922. The farm had been our whole life. We had hardly left it in the 4 years, and in a way we hated to leave. But in another way, I think we all had a desire for broader and more challenging experiences, which we all found in Salt Lake. But those 4 years were the high spot of my childhood. I had more fun and enjoyment there. They moved into the house there on the 6200 and 2700 East, and the remnants of the mill were still there. Times were hard, and the war had just ended. After the holidays, she started to school again at Oakwood. The summers of 22 and 23, I worked for Grandpa Knudsen at the store. I was there alone a lot of the time. We sold ice cream cones, and on Sundays I'd dish that ice cream till my arm ached. We also sold candy bars, popcorn, soda, pop, and other things. Then in 1924 and 25, O.C. Tanner and Florence Dyer bought the store from her Grandpa Knudsen. And then Aunt Mame rented the store, and I worked for her from 1927 to 1928. The store was a big part of her life, and that store was called Knudsen Corner. The original building is the building that Mark Eaton has bought and made into a restaurant. In May 1929, she graduated. She says, I worked full-time at the store with hardly a day off. That fall, she prepared to go to the University of Utah. She said, I had my tonsils out, and was I sick. The doctor took them out in his office, and soon we went and waited for Dyers, who were their neighbors, to take her home. She said, my head felt as big as a barrel and ached terribly. We finally got home, and 2 weeks later, I registered at the U of U. I will never forget that day, waiting in line till I thought I'd faint. I was still so weak from the operation, but I knew if I didn't do it then, I wouldn't do it at all. I wouldn't be able to get the classes I wanted, so I stuck it out. And then her friend Ruby helped her get registered and found her way around. She says, I felt so out of place among so many cultured and well-dressed people. Even after I got my classes, there were so many worries confronting me. She said, how was I to get there every morning? She had no car. She went by faith. Nowadays, the kids have to get the car first and then they think about going to college. She said, I more or less depended on some kind soul to pick me up. That's what it amounted to. If I walked 23rd East, there was a major that worked at Fort Douglas, and his wife worked at the U. He picked me up one morning, and so a number of times I went with them. At night, I came out on the bus and walked from Castil's Lane. And I think that was about probably a mile or 2 miles from their home that she walked home. She said, one night I came so close to freezing my legs. Uncle Edward was at home, and when he saw me, ran and got some snow in a pan and put that on my legs. I think his quick action saved me. I certainly appreciated his help. Education was a big part to her, and she did everything to get her college education. She studied hard at the U, and during the day she would have time to go to the library and find the material that she knew she couldn't find at home. She was miles away from the U, so if she didn't get it during the day, she knew she was out of luck once she got home. One day while she was at the library there at the U, she said, I set my purse down on one of the shelves and then began looking for a book to complete some assignment. When I looked for my purse, it was gone. I discovered that the back of the shelf was missing, and the thief just waited for things to be laid down. I was sick, for all my valuable cards for the U were in my purse. It contained no money. But most valuable of all was a lovely Schaefer pen and pencil set engraved with my name in gold that Alan, my dad, had given her for Christmas. I must have been with someone as I needed some money to get home, but that is all a blank. I guess my mind was so centered on the loss that all else was blotted out. And over the years, time and time again, she would dream of losing her purse. And many a morning, she would recap the dream of losing her purse again. And if you've ever been around her, she always clutched her purse and kept her purse always, always with her, always in sight. And at night, she would find her purse and go put it in a little place. So if anybody come through the night, she'd just find it the next morning. Even when we took her in the trailer, she would find her purse and stash it away. You could tell that really made a big impression, that stealing of the purse, even though she had probably really nothing in it. She graduated with a 2-year certificate in 1931 from the U, and then by August, she had a contract to teach the first grade. And in those days, they always put a new teacher with another teacher, and she made $70 a month. And then in May of 1933, Aunt Dean asked her to come down to California, and she went down, and she and Uncle Earl went to a summer school at San Francisco State Teachers College. Aunt Dean played a big part in her life also. The summer of 1934, she went to summer school at the U of U. And then in the July of 1935, she married my dad. At 8 o'clock that night, we were married at Henry Schraven's, which was a uncle to my dad. And her sister was so sick with the scarlet fever that her mother was only able to leave her for just a little while. She said Helen was in such pain that my mother couldn't leave her long, so everything was as short as possible. We had a delicious dinner after the ceremony. Alan's parents and my parents and Aunt Julia. The Uncle Uncle Henry was in Montana on a job. How simple. Cindy, should we cut your wedding down to about like that? So simple. And Mother was simple, and it's been mainly because she never had a lot of fuss because of the money in their home. Then in August, Uncle Henry Schraven asked if they would go to Montana to help with a job up there. He was building an addition onto the Bethlehem steel plant. We stopped at Spencer, Idaho that night, got to Helen at about noon the next day. Henry met us and showed us around, and there was nothing in Helena, so we went to East Helena where the plant was and found a house to rent. It was boarded up, and how it reeked of smelter dust. The first night I thought we'd smother, what with the heat and the fine smelter dust. The next day we got it opened up more, cleaned out and aired, and it was fair, she said. And she talked about going to the library in Helena, and she says, I heard a lady in the library say that we should try to fill each day with as many good things as we could, for once the day is gone, it is gone forever, and we cannot call it back. At that time, those words particularly impressed me, and I still remember where I heard them. And I think that was kind of her motto to life. She was never an idle person, and she always made good use of her time. She set out to accomplish a lot each day, and she was a doer and a goer. After the snow came and it got cold, I was ready to go home. Each night I'd drive over to get Alan and be so anxious to know if they were through. And night after night I did this and was disappointed every night. Then finally the night when they were finished, I couldn't believe it, but I had been packing our things slowly, so I was ready. Alan said, this is it, let's get out of here. And they went back to pay the landlady and gather the rest of their belongings. And the landlady had an older son, about my dad's age, and they wanted to come in and have drinks and dinner. And my father got quite anxious and uneasy, and he just finally up and said, no, we've got to go. And they left the house and headed for Salt Lake. And Alan said he didn't like the feel and look of the weather. The sky was the same everywhere we looked, cloudy and grayish and forbidding. He was so anxious to leave that he said he wasn't hungry, and that was unusual. 2 hours later at Butte, we got our dinner, and what a dinner. We traveled all night, and it got colder and colder. There was no heater in the car, and those cars were not airtight at that time either. She said, finally my teeth began to chatter, and Alan stopped and got some blankets from the trunk of the car. They traveled all night, and then that next morning they pulled into his folks' driveway at 11 a.m. We drove into Alan's folks' driveway, and they came rushing down the steps, anxious and worried. They didn't know we had even left Montana, but they told us of an awful earthquake that had happened in the night. We were so surprised, and then I realized the meaning of Alan's concern earlier. He could and did foretell the future on several occasions. We went in the house and read the paper, and sure enough, Helena had had an extra big one. Many of the buildings were destroyed, including the new high school that had been dedicated while they were there. About a week later, we received a letter from the neighbors telling us the brick chimney over our bed and heads had been there, where they had fallen in on our bed. Then we thought more seriously of how bad the earthquake must have been. If we had stayed one more night, we would have been killed, for I remember the height of that chimney. They came home and found the duplex that they had left open, and so they rented it again, which was on about 11th East and almost 21st South. And then it wasn't much longer that they moved to Bryan Avenue, but Alan was born while they were there at the duplex. When they were on Bryan Avenue, the rest of us children were born there, and we had a house that in between us and my father's cousin and his children, and many a hair-raising story can be told of the kids on that block. If you've listened to any of my brothers talk, those were some good times that I missed out on, because I wasn't born until probably about 5 years before we left Bryan. And in 1959, the family moved to Lamborn with a larger home, yard, and space for the family, and my mother and dad fixed up that home with as money would allow them to, just a little bit at a time. It wasn't many years later after that my dad became too weak to continue with the bricklaying and tried to do a few different odd jobs, and then finally he had to just quit work totally. Mother was able to begin teaching kindergarten at that time for a gentleman up here on 33rd South in his home, and she taught both the morning and the afternoon classes. And while she taught, she started back to the U to recertify so she could teach in the public schools. Not long before my father passed away, they were sealed in the Salt Lake Temple. My father passed away on February 6, 1966, and Mother continued on as the sole breadwinner. At that point, Alan was married, and the older boys helped Mother with the home and other things. Mother taught at different elementaries at that time, but she was at Lincoln Elementary probably the longest amount of time, there on 39th and 5th East. And that's where she made several of her long-time close friends. Many of the teachers she just became really close to. Mother would teach in the day, and that was in the time when you didn't have 3 or 4 aides to help. She would teach in the day and then bring her home her paperwork to correct and then make plans for the next day. Every night after dinner, you could find Mother at the dining room table correcting papers. She would teach from 9 to 3. She took her turn out on the playground, the hall duty, the playground duty, the lunchroom duty, helped with the plays, made the books, and was on each committee as needed. And then the paperwork always went home at night. And Mother put her whole heart and soul into teaching, and the students truly benefited from it. She retired in 1977, June 2nd being her last day. But she only retired from school teaching in the public schools because her lifestyle did not slow down at all at that time. She became a regular temple attender and got into the extraction program of the church, which she dearly loved and spent many, many years in that. She got into the genealogy and worked on it and extracted some of her own names and didn't let them lie until she got them fully completed with her temple work. Mother loved the outdoors, and as you've heard, she's had that all through life. She loved fishing, and that was something that my father taught her. Fly fishing was her specialty, and she was known for losing many, many flies. But she didn't give up. She didn't let it get her down. She just kept right on with it, and she'd get one fly hung up in the trees and ask somebody to come help her get that one out, and then ask for their pole while they were getting it out for her. She even continued that. My dad taught her that early in life, or early in their marriage, and she continued that. Even though she had children, she would pack up those kids and away they would go on many a Saturday. And stories told that whoever was the littlest would usually get leashed to the tree if they couldn't keep track of themselves. And even up until last year, she was fly fishing. She tried to fly fishing with Brian on the Huntington River, only disgusted because she didn't have her fishing boots with her so she could put the fly right where she wanted it. She didn't get it right the first time. She tried and tried and tried, and many a time she went with the boys and caught many a nice little catch, and a lot with the grandchildren too. Her mother was a worker, a doer, never idle, and even in her last years, you could either find a pile of books that she was reading, or cooking, or out in the yard fussing the best that she could, or she was taking piano lessons. Her last recital being in October of last year. Mother was always concerned about the family, each family member, whether it was an operation, a job, a new baby being born, or graduation, or illness. She would probably more inside herself worry about it than she would let it be known, but she was their whole heart. President Knudsen tells a story of how he went to a funeral home to support a family, and went to the viewing the night before, and the little girl of the mother who had passed away was standing there, and she said, "I know you, you're Brother Knudsen." And she said, "Don't cry, Brother Knudsen." She says, "I'm not crying. My mommy taught me about the temple and eternity and promised me we would be together again. And my mommy always told the truth." And I'm grateful for that, the same example. Grateful for my mother and for the things that she taught us. She taught us of the eternal plan and was such a good example to all of us. Like Nephi of old, my brothers and I have been born of goodly parents. I'm grateful for that example. I'm grateful for the good life that she had. And know that now it's up to us to live worthily, that we can be an eternal family once more. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
just wrote about a year ago, probably, and how fortunate we are she did not wait another year. We may get a message from that. And I'm sure that the music of these wonderful grandchildren or great-grandchildren was a joy for her to hear. For about 60 years, I have observed that what the Knudsen family have suffered in lack of family reunions has been made up for by family funeral gatherings. And there has been one distinct characteristic different from family reunions, because one member of those gatherings, though in many respects conspicuous by their absence, was the centerpiece of all of our thoughts and all of our conversation. And most of the ones that I attended usually centered around one great ancestor that had lived to a happy old age. And so that rather than being an hour of grieving, it was an hour of happy and willing farewell. And that's how it should be this morning, because Virginia is certainly the centerpiece this morning. We are here really, I hope, in a joyful way to celebrate the life of a great lady who was so important to all of us in many, many ways. And not only to us, but so many living and dead who are not here. To my mother and father, she was a great daughter. She fulfilled Dad's fondest dreams of his first child attending the university and getting a degree and becoming an educator. And to Mother, she was such an ideal daughter, so helpful, so energetic, so willing. To Alan Benjamin Clark, she was a wonderful wife, and not only the essence of domestic energy and enterprise, but on his fishing trips and hunting trips, she was a wonderful companion, hiking the highest peaks, hunting the antelope, hunting the elk, and hunting the deer and pheasants. To 5 of you here today, she was a wonderful mother. A wonderful mother who has imparted to you so many great truths and example and a friendly spirit. And to 25 of you here, she is a wonderful grandmother. And to 18 of you, she is a wonderful great-grandmother. What a rare opportunity to have and to be held and to talk to a great-grandmother. Something that in my day was somewhat unusual. And to my wife and I, we scarcely remembered our grandparents. And Virginia was so many things. She was a great aunt. To some of you, perhaps your favorite aunt. And to hundreds of children, she was a wonderful teacher. And no doubt some of them idolized her, as you may have idolized a teacher that had such a friendly, warm smile and such a personal interest in every student. And beyond that, she was a wonderful friend to so many in her wards where she lived. And she was a great friend to all of us. And to 4 of us, living and dead, she was a marvelous sister. I can't imagine a more ideal sister than Virginia. But I would like to acquaint you with a different person that you may be thinking of today. The thin, frail form that you have seen now for several years, though still beautiful, was not the Virginia that I knew as I was growing up. No, she was my big sister. And when she would chase me around the farm and catch me and beat up on me, I really was struck with terror. Now Virginia was much more sturdily built in those days. She was always bigger than I. And she was never thin and never fat. And she was never slow and never weak. And when she would catch me, she would just beat on me. Now the nice thing about Dad when he beat me up, one of Dad's favorite expletives was, I'm going to thrash you within an inch of your life. In fact, today you are seeing the remnants of a boy who was thrashed within an inch of his life, not once, but several times. But Dad was very generous. Oh, he was generous. He spared my tender bottom. Well, Virginia did too. But Dad was nice enough to use the flat of his hand when he held me by the arm and pounded me on the back. But Virginia, in her anger, from what source? Her anger, she would hold me with that vice grip and beat me with her fist till my poor back was about to cave in before I escaped and scampered up a tall box elder tree and began whistling again or singing again to tantalize her. I was kind of the terror to not only to the family but to the whole neighborhood, because I had a strange, unending capacity to sing and whistle hour upon hour. Well, it all began with my debut when I was walking up towards Knudsen's Inn in the middle of the street at 3 years old in my birthday suit, singing my Wild Irish Road. And with that first successful experience, I had to go on to bigger and better things. And sometimes I would sing for hours and whistle for hours until the neighbors would come over on several occasions and say, or call up and say, Mrs. Knudsen, your son has been whistling or singing the same song for 2 hours. Could you ask him to please change the tune? We were out till 3 o'clock with a party. We really need some sleep. And so I guess I drove people a little crazy doing that. And especially my sisters. When they would have a friend over and be sitting under one of those big box elder trees, I delighted in teasing them and saying all sorts of ridiculous things. And so Virginia, oh, wow. My back still hurts. But the marvelous thing about it, when evening came and we gathered around the supper table, all those bursts of anger and vengeance were gone, and we had a happy family. We in that big old kitchen around that big kitchen table with the old coal range, and Mother quietly going about fixing the beautiful, wonderful rolls, biscuits, and fresh bread. The smell of that still comes back to me now. We had some of the most rollicking laughter and giggling times. Helen was so much like some of our comedians today, and she was tall and thin. She had a wonderful voice. She took the lead in many of the plays at school, and she could burst out with some, we always would say, she could say the darndest things that would just start us off laughing. And so many times we would all start giggling until there were just tears in our eyes. Harvey, some of you remember, he could tell some of the strangest yarns, and you were never sure which were true and which were made up. Always a combination. And he never made a story shorter, he embellished it, as some of us do today. But it was a happy family. And we had strange things happen in that family. One time a fire came downtown, burned up some sort of a bakery, I suppose. And lo and behold, our brother, Rudolph, came home with a pasteboard box. It was 3 feet square in all directions, just full of those wonderful little thin wafers with the cream inside. I've forgotten the name, but we lived on them for months. I guess he still remembers that. And then we got into a contest, some sort of a contest. I'm not sure whether Rudolph or Virginia started it, but it was a contest about words. A prize was offered for the family that could turn in the most words of some sort. Well, we just launched ourselves into that project. And each of us went around the room at the night, trying to get more words. And we each had 4 or 5 typewritten sheets, just with handwritten words. It was just insane the way we went at this project, as though we were going to win something. Well, we didn't win anything, but we were so highly magnified and thoroughly educated with words that we just basked in them. Kind of disappointing, after all that exposure, that I became a person of so few words. Virginia was such a stabling influence. Actually, Virginia is the hub of the family Knudsen wheel, because around her now, and for many years, everything has evolved. I remember being separated 10 years, of course, her life went many directions and mine, and seldom did they cross. So I don't recall a lot of things that we had together. But one of the memorable pictures of Virginia was on a beautiful horse, a beautiful dark brown bay horse. And I just wonder if his name was not Snip. I'm sure Rudolph would know. But she was such a beautiful picture on that horse with a beautiful dark wavy hair and a big smile. I would think of Guinevere on a gallant stallion in the days of King Arthur. Virginia was a bright, very bright person. Not just her smile. No, she was very bright. In fact, considering the fact that she got whooping cough and mumps and had to stay out all 1 year, imagine her second year class student, her teacher, coming to her in the middle of the year and saying, "Virginia, would you like to go into the 3rd grade?" And Virginia was elated. Yes. Because Virginia, from the very time that she'd mastered words through phonics and then came to books, she began to read everything. Everything she could lay her hands on. In Idaho, she went to the Rigby Library. She had a consummate interest in words and in ideas, and was a great reader. And as a consequence, she became a great teacher and imparted so much of her intelligence to us. And she had experiences on the farm that all of us have had, maybe not quite like this one. In 1933, she was sitting in a little house, a little outhouse. You may have a picture of what I have in mind. It was out behind the chicken coop. And she was no doubt browsing through the Sears and Roebuck catalog. We considered that a house of learning and a house of dreaming, because we dreamed about all the toys and all the wonderful things that the better now, best other side of the world had. I looked at those wonderful things in that book so many times as I sat there contemplating life. And on this particular day, though, Virginia had a rare experience, because while she was so consumed with this wonderful pictorial book, the little house began moving. The little house began moving back and forth, and I believe that her whole experience there suffered a sudden and abrupt finish as she dashed into the house to learn that she had sat through an earthquake. Well, I just want to say that it's remarkable that we are even in the Mormon Church today, considering the remarkable indifference that most of the Knudsens that I knew had about religion. It's really a wonder. But fortunately, we were rescued. I was rescued when I found an old Book of Mormon with no cover on it and all threadbare and worn, and I got religion. Had to leave my friends we were going out in the desert digging up Indian relics. I had to give up tantalizing and ridiculing my friends that went to church. And I got working in the church, and first thing you know, I was janitor, I led the music, and the bishop had to get rid of me, so he sent me on a mission. And so, and how can I go on a mission? I had no money, and Dad couldn't afford to send me, but my wonderful brother, Rudolph, came to my rescue and sent me a check faithfully down to the flat woods of Georgia and Florida. And I had a wonderful mission for which I shall be eternally indebted to him. But all my efforts to somehow impart of that mission to some of my aunts and uncles seemed to fall on deaf ears. And even my father was a little shy about the Bible when I said to him one night, "Dad, I want to show you where the Golden Rule comes from," because he lived by the Golden Rule. And he said, no. Somehow, when Rasmus came, one of their first converts in Denmark, came to America and brought my grandfather, Rudolph, who was now 8 years old, 7.5 years old, and Victoria, they didn't get baptized. What happened? We don't know. We don't know. But never have I seen religion fade away in a family so fast as it must have done soon after Rasmus came to America. One day, though, I received a marvelous reward when I asked Virginia, years later, Virginia, how come you got active in the church? She says, well, you know, one day, soon after you got home from your mission, you sat me down and said, Virginia, you know, it's no accident. This beautiful valley is no accident. It's no accident that we have the beautiful Temple Square and the beautiful temple and Brigham Young University. It's no accident that you and I live in Camelot, live in a little paradise on Cottonwood Creek. It's no accident that Rasmus came to build a mill. It's all because of Joseph Smith as a little boy that went into the woods and prayed to find out which church was true. It's no accident, Virginia. Well, she told me that she thought about that, and I take no credit for it, but somehow, maybe that little conversation had something to do and wormed into her soul until she became interested in starting attending church. And soon, her son and daughter, I think, were going to church too. And Dave ends up going on a mission of becoming bishop. And so, how interesting it is that the gospel picks out one or two here and there, and gradually, hopefully, we can all be brought back together again. And that is my prayer, my hope today, that these, you children, and you grandchildren, and you great, wonderful great-grandchildren will come to understand the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God, will understand that the great chain, the family chain of God, must be brought together. How terrible it would be not to have our wonderful relatives, our wonderful brothers and sisters like Virginia, to be with them in eternity. And this is my prayer in the name of Jesus Christ.
A love inspired by Heavenly Father's plan. A mother's hands reflect a life of service, a life of sacrifice for those she loves. And with her giving hands, she shapes the soul of man, prepares him for eternal life above. A mother's words teach children righteous living, and her example leads them to the light. She speaks the words of truth which guide their tender youth and point the course they take throughout their lives. A mother's life reflects itself in our life. Her ways of living are ingrained in us, and through the changing years and days of joy and tears, her love will lead us on. Her words will point the course. Her hands will lift us up to God.
When I was talking with a granddaughter, she said one of her children, she didn't know for sure how to tell great-grandchild about Grandma's death. And if I would have known then, why I would have brought my surgical glove, so that I want you to just think that I have my surgical glove on my hand. You can see through the glove, and it moves just the same as if there was no hand, no glove at all. But I can take that glove off, and I can make the fingers, and it just holds out steady. It doesn't move or do anything. And death is like that. The body is like the glove. And at the time of death, when the spirit goes out of the body, then the body is like a glove, and the spirit goes on to heaven. And they look the same. They're identical. But one, like our lovely grandmother here, her body is going to go back to the dust, and her spirit will go back to God who gave it. Now we have a loving Savior that has given us the opportunity to once again have our bodies and our spirits unite together. So once again, in the resurrection, the glove will come back onto the hand, the spirit will come back into the body, and it will move. It will never again separate again. Such is dying. I like the words that you have on your program of David O. McKay. Your mother closed her eyes in peaceful slumber and awakened with the loved ones. And that is the way I'm sure it is. I would just like to mention a couple of things about Sister Virginia. I was amazed when I first visited her to find out that she loved to fish and hunt. That seemed just a man thing to do where I came from, but she sure changed my mind on that. Another thing that I was surprised that she had bees in her back of her yard. And a lot of people thought that bees, they're just for stinging. But people that really know the purpose of the bee know that we can't have fruit, we can't have apples and peaches and pears and cherries and all these delicious fruits if we don't have the bee to cross-pollinate. And where I lived, grew up on a farm, I knew that we had to have bees or we couldn't raise seed, the corn wouldn't germinate. And so she saw this because she loved nature and she loved to have her own honey, and she just understood those things. But I don't want to take longer only to say that we have loved to have her in our ward. I am thrilled to be her bishop. She was our extraction person in the ward till she had her stroke. And very faithful and always willing to do all that she could. And so I want to bear you my testimony that I know through the Lord Jesus Christ, she will live again and we will live again. And we will be together as a family. And this is just as normal as being born. She is being born into the next life. Or has been born, and she doesn't have to learn to crawl again, but she can just go right forward and run and play. And won't have Darwin to chase her around, but she will. We will have our closing hymn, Sister Grace Peters.
Keep it down from the sky. The sky makes the bottom
I sure enjoy it. And
I know together more often. We started out.
Excuse me.
That's right.